if you're going to look from a rural America perspective, the challenges that are out there, we've made some improvements. Is there more we need to be doing, and what areas would you invest in if you were sitting in this chair?
Yes, sir. There's a lot of room for improvement, and that's what we hear consistently from our members. One thing that I think is important for this committee and for this entire town to really wrap their heads around is that right now only 52% of our generation of veterans are enrolled in VA health care. Only half. So we've got to think more creatively. The country thinks that the VA is the one stop, the only solution, the silver bullet that is going to solve all the problems of this generation. And the VA, I know, is improving. Obviously, we're disappointed they're not here. They have a long way to go. But we've also got to think more creatively. And I think we have to have a sustained effort that invests in community-based nonprofits, that enrolls the private sector, that involves the faith-based community, the people who are in those rural communities, because the VA has not innovated as a nationwide model. It's still catching up from 30 years ago in every way, shape, or form. So what we've seen as successful is involving those communities, leveraging technology especially. I mean, that's how you can get to those folks where they have decent access to the internet, but that does give you a tremendous opportunity for innovation and for impact. You're not going to be able to bring everybody 400 miles to the nearest facility. So we've got to think creatively and find ways to invest in the community-based solutions that are working. Find those pilots and then take them to scale. Because that's where we see in the field the most consistent entrepreneurial attitude. It's that community-based church group or VFW hall or folks who are at the point of attack who are trying to deal with those problems. We haven't seen a lot of innovation that's really been encouraged and taken to scale outside of the VA. So that is kind of, I think, a big bite of the apple that we as a nation have to start to take on. The president's got to reframe it as well. He's got to talk about more than the VA when we talk about veterans.
Okay.
Paul, I think the comments you made about the faith-based communities or the faith-based interaction in the communities, and not just faith-based, but just all of the the nonprofits, the charitable organizations are trying to do a good job. One of the problems that we see all of these deployments from our Guard units, and they, unlike going off with a regular unit and then coming back, you're still with your buddies, life goes on, but just all of a sudden, to be thrown back into, and many times, myself representing a southern state, many times going back, and I think that's probably true throughout the country, going back to small communities where there's not a lot of resources, very limited with the VA, and then just the nature of the beast of how they're separated, it really is real important. So we'd like to work with you to strengthen, your ideas on how we strengthen those relationships and encourage that to flourish. Could you comment about that for a second? Or?
Yes, sir. I think it's about wrapping the communities around these veterans when they come home. And what's so unprecedented is the small percentage of people who are serving relative to the overall population. Right. So if we can find creative ways to galvanize around those veterans, it will be a worthy investment. And I think what I see in the local communities and in the rural areas especially is a patchwork of services. If someone calls me from rural Montana and says, my husband's suicidal, the services available to them are going to be dramatically different than Kansas or Florida or somewhere else. And so our team has a really difficult time of being able to deliver or even connect them with reliable services because it's so patchwork nationally. And I really firmly believe there hasn't been a significant investment nationwide in those community groups of all kinds. And the comparison that we've started to draw recently is the veteran space right now is kind of like AIDS 25 or 30 years ago, 25 years ago, when you didn't have existing infrastructures. There's no massive philanthropic investment. There's no corporate investment. A lot of the nonprofits only started 7, 8 years ago, some of them out of people's trunks. So we're really in the early stages of creating an entire national network around a totally new set of issues, whether it's multiple amputations or traumatic brain injury or women's issues. A lot of this stuff is new, and there's not a system in place nationwide to tackle it. So I think we've really got to issue a national call over and over again on some of the issues that Senator Tester talked about earlier. The fact that we still don't have enough qualified mental health care workers is ridiculous. I've been coming here every year talking about this. And if the president stood up tomorrow and said, if you want to serve your country, be a qualified mental health care worker, go work at the VA, go work at the DOD, and we're going to pay you, and we're going to support you, and we're going to train you, that's a great way for people to serve their country, and I think they would step up. We've got to make those calls clear, and we've got to think more creatively than outside the existing bureaucracies.
Oh, very good. I agree.
Mr. Rieckhoff, in your written testimony, you state that long-term, it's estimated it'll cost between $600 billion and $1 trillion to care for OEF, OIF veterans alone. I'm interested in learning a little bit more about your estimate. Is this a study conducted by you folks or any other organization that would come up with this?
I think this is actually to the doctor's earlier point. Estimates are all over the place, and in part because we don't have real good research on a lot of things. So, these are high-end, low-end estimates that come from a variety of places ranging from RAND to Harvard researchers to veterans groups. And I think two things we have to identify to earlier questions is on homelessness, the VA just released their new numbers of 10,000. Those numbers are really fuzzy. Places like New York don't even count veterans when they go out to count homeless people. So we really don't know what the cost of that is going to be. On suicide specifically, we don't know how many veteran suicides there are. That is really troubling. We see anecdotally suicides from the community on a regular basis that aren't counted. If you separate from the military and you're a veteran, you don't get counted. And we can't even begin to calculate those costs. So I think it's important that we recognize that some of the best research that came from the RAND study back in 2008 is still the best research now. And that was privately funded. So, to answer your question, sir, is we don't know. I mean, and I don't think anybody knows. And anybody who tells you they do know, let's see the research. Across this industry, as you guys try to think in the next couple of years about how to spend money and how to support different programs, we need much more research. And we all have a hard time, I think, finding really good data. And I think the suicide is the best example. We have no idea how many veterans have committed suicide since 9/11. Nobody knows because there's nobody counting. And I think that's a major problem when we try to forecast any kind of cost.